even within the White House, it seems that nobody really knows what is going on with U.S. support for Ukraine. The president seems to be admitting that Russia holds all the cards. What exactly is the brilliant businessman trying to do in terms of, I guess, a negotiation tactic? Plus, is the U.S. now telling international partners that they can't call it a war of Russian aggression? That's a little too mean to the poor Russians. But at the end of the day, does the president even really know who is negotiating in Ukraine and what they're doing? Some of his tweets seem to be, well, not really all that accurate, but it's not even clear that anyone really knows who is meeting with who in Ukraine. We're going to talk about all that, plus the Secretary of Defense is apparently ordering large-scale budget cuts to the U.S. Department of Defense. Just what is this all about, and why is this taking place? And who exactly stands to really benefit from the DoD cuts? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is actually just one of those insane things. I hate Politico as much as anybody, right? They have a pretty strong bias, but it's politico.eu, so they're not quite as partisan, I think, in here. But at the end of the day, it's not really that easy to spin these kind of quotes, right? This is a line from President Trump talking to BBC aboard Air Force One. He said, "I think the Russians want to see the war end. I really do. But I think they have the cards a little bit because they've taken a lot of territory, so they have the cards." And this is sort of, kind of, this is true. It is factually correct that the Russians hold more territory of Ukraine than Ukraine holds of Russia. That's objectively true. But that doesn't mean that Russia holds the cards, right? And that is not really the phrasing you want to use. Plus, it seems to be an admission of defeat, right? If you are negotiating with someone, imagine you were to sit there and go, "Man, looks like you have all the cards," right? They would either, your first thought would be, "Wow, that's a really dumb negotiating tactic to admit that you have zero leverage." And frankly, you'd pretty much be right. Now, this could be some kind of 5D chess where the president's trying to lull Russia into a sense of security. But I have yet to see Trump kind of make these kind of subtle moves. Instead, what I think this is really about is about coercing Ukraine to sign that mineral deal that's absolutely unbelievably shitty. And I think that is basically everything the president is doing, is trying to do just a New York real estate scammer playbook to get Zelensky to sign off on basically giving his entire country's economy over to the United States forever. And this is exactly what you would expect from New York real estate. Just absolutely cutthroat, dirtbaggery, and to be like, "Wow, we can't even help you out, man. Looks like your enemies, right, are really gonna take you over," right? Trump also was like, "Oh, you're not gonna have a country for very long if you keep it up." And this sort of thing is just I don't know what else to tell you. This is the dirtiest, like, car salesman type negotiation tactics I've ever seen. But the real problem is that he's not even negotiating with the right person, right? The negotiations that you're trying to get is Russia, right? Because, again, as we have talked about extensively on this channel, if Russia emerges victorious, how many U.S. companies do you think are going to be allowed to operate in Ukraine? The answer is zero. It's going to be, right, every major Ukrainian industry is going to be controlled by a Russian oligarch, because that is how it works in Russia. The best you can get is sort of vague joint ventures that only happen when Putin wants them to happen. And so the fact is that no one can sit there and explain to Trump that, "Hey, dudes, like, that deal is already..." Now, obviously, a $500 billion infinite reparations deal is just morally wrong and also, like, pointlessly coercive when, again, the U.S. is going to get a return on investment if Ukraine wins through, again, foreign direct investment, through increased trade with Ukraine. It's going to pay for itself, right? And so the fact that no one's explained this to the president is just absolutely astounding to me. But I don't think the president actually knows that much about what's going on. One, he's also saying the U.S. is objecting to using the phrase Russian aggression in a pretty neutral G7 statement on Ukraine. And again, I think there is not in the rest of context, right? Like this could be a tactic used for a successful negotiation, but generally we haven't seen the U.S. operating this way, right? The U.S., again, operates like sketchy New York real estate. And sketchy New York real estate people, they are not going to do the subtlety that comes with saying, hey, in order to get Russia to the negotiating table, they have to think that the U.S. is a neutral party. They have to think that the U.S. is not necessarily this like super pro-Ukraine force to be reckoned with. Instead, so we've got to dial back our language. We've got to get the two sides together. But the problem is that no amount of negotiation, no amount of language policing is going to change the reality that the U.S. has been very clear that our interests and what Russia believes its interests are diametrically opposed. Again, they are not, in fact, diametrically opposed. Russia just has a conception of power that basically is unchanged since about the 1820s, right? And that is more land, good. If I have more land, I'm more powerful. The end. That is the Russian conception of power. That has been the driving force why Russia controls 1/5 of the world's landmass. But it is not, that is not necessarily true. As we've seen, economic and social power carries a lot more weight in the modern world. And that is something that Russian and U.S. interests are actually not opposed, right? If Russia was to just withdraw from Ukraine or to sign a deal, which had the simplest way to do it is just to tell Russia, listen, there are two paths. There is a stick, which is massive U.S. intervention, enough that we guarantee we will ensure that every Russian soldier in occupied Ukraine is exterminated. And the other path is to say, listen, you withdraw to this contact line, or you withdraw to these 2014 borders. We give you international recognition. We give you a huge foreign direct investment in your economy. We do all these partnership deals. We are going to supercharge your economy. Every Russian oligarch who backed you is going to get a huge fucking payday, and we're going to lift as many sanctions as we can. That sort of deal is going to be beneficial to the U.S. economy and beneficial to the Russian economy. That is a much more proven, effective way to negotiate with someone like Putin, because he does not respond to verbal threats in the same way, right? This is someone who is a KGB agent. He knows the difference between a real threat and a bunch of empty language. So again, I think in context, I want to believe this is part of a sophisticated negotiation. I really do. But here's the problem, is that would assume that there is a level of coordination and strategy being executed. And there's so many unforced errors that I don't believe that. It's like a pitcher, right? At the end of the day, if an MLB pitcher walks two batters back to back, you're going to say that's intentional. But if you see a little league team walk two batters back to back, you're going to say that is probably not intentional. That is probably just poor play. And the reason you can discern that, even if they were adults, is that you would look at other errors being committed. And when you look at the totality of play here, you're seeing that this is not a 5D chess strategy type of play. This is just a bunch of unforced errors. For example, President Donald Trump said that his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was treated rudely during an official visit to Kiev, and he accused Zelensky of sleeping instead of meeting with the Treasury Secretary and failing to make a deal, right? It's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who has zero foreign policy experience. This is literally the first time he's ever done foreign policy in his entire life. Met Zelensky in Ukraine's capital last week to discuss Trump's unbelievably insane reparations deal. And he said, and this is a quote from Trump, Scott Bessent actually went there and was treated rather rudely because essentially they told him no, we won't sign this deal. Which that's not being rude. That's just declining to sign a deal. And he says Zelensky was sleeping and unavailable to meet him, right? He said Bessa traveled many hours on the train, which is a dangerous trip. And we're talking about the Secretary of the Treasury. He went there to get a document signed. No, he went there to ask if Ukraine would sign this unbelievably exploitive deal. And when he got there, he came back empty. They wouldn't sign the document, right? Yeah, that's because the document was like bordering on illegal, right? And as Trump does, you can only be two things with him, right? You can either be the worst person ever to live, or you're his bestie because you do everything he says. Here's the problem, though. Zelensky met with the Treasury Secretary. Here he is. Here's a picture of these guys, of them broing out. Look at this meeting. It appears that both parties to this meeting are awake. And maybe this is AI generated, but I'm going to go ahead and say that probably not. They really look convincingly awake. I don't know what to tell you. And that does look like the Treasury Secretary. So it appears they had a meeting. Now, here's the other place where things go even more sideways, right? Keith Kellogg, who, again, is Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, but who's not involved in this mineral negotiation and not involved in the negotiations with Russia. It's not clear what his official role is because he was welcomed and met with Zelensky, right? Zelensky brought him into the Ukrainian presidential palace. But then, usually when this happens, the two hold a press conference, and the Ukrainian president's spokesperson said that the cancellation was in accordance with U.S. wishes. But Zelensky did say we had a productive meeting, right? Zelensky said it was important for Ukraine that American strength is felt and that Ukraine is ready for a strong, effective investment and security agreement with Trump, right? Now, this is really interesting because what it says is this meeting happened. There was supposed to be a press conference, and then someone at the U.S. called and was like, no press conference. You can't have a press conference. And, well, if you can't do that, then why would you publicize the meeting in the first place, right? Again, why would you go there in person in the first place? Because, as I point out, these meetings are, right, the information can be exchanged via phone call, via lower level meetings. Like, oftentimes these high level meetings between presidents and special envoys are stage managed events a little bit, right? A lot of times lower level aides have hashed out the key issues. Maybe there's key decision points that both sides really need to talk through. But generally, these are public displays as much as they are real meaningful communications. And so the fact is that this happened, and then someone in the US got wind of it, and they said, no, you can't do this. This says that there is not 5D chess, because you don't make these kind of unforced errors if you're playing 5D chess, right? You don't take 2 steps forward and then take 2 steps back, right? I don't know what else to tell you. This is just it's like changing the roster in a lineup in baseball and then changing it back like an hour later, right? It just says that you don't really know what's going on. And that is the kind of data that you look for that says, okay, this is probably not 5D chess that we're experiencing here. This is probably more like, again, impulsive, impetuous, New York real estate, hair trigger, thin skin type stuff, right? Just can't handle rejection. And this is I don't know what else to tell you. This is a huge fucking problem. This is not the way things are done. And what's funny is that there is a fundamental misunderstanding about the role of the U.S. president and the skills involved in a U.S. president, because part of our system of checks and balances mean that you need buy-in to do something, right? Just like Ukraine aid. At the end of the day, the president cannot release Ukraine aid. The president cannot fund it. He does not control the power of the purse. Only, in fact, the House of Representatives must originate all spending bills in the United States, which means that you have to have friends in Congress, enough friends in Congress to push through your legislative agenda, which means you have to be a compromise maker. You got to be a deal maker. You got to be a get everybody on board kind of guy, right? You got to be a team builder. And there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be a team builder. And that is a skill that the president must have, right? And the fact is that particularly in this kind of cutthroat New York real estate business, they're just not team efforts. Like, that's just how it is. A person, individuals buy buildings, they buy entities, they just don't do things as teams, right? They have really absolute control. And you're seeing this, right? You're seeing this in real time. This is someone who had never really seemed to have gotten the skills necessary, but he demanded a high level of control over the government. He says, I will have personal control. You will do what I say. I'm not going to let the deep state or the political establishment tell me what to do. But like at the end of the day, that's how our government works. That's intrinsic to a checks and balances, co-equal branch of government, representative democracy that we have. And so the fact is that when you have somebody who tries to operate this way, this is the result. This is the result. Totally broken policies. The left hand, the right hand, the left foot, the right foot, they're all doing different things. And imagine seeing somebody trying to walk with their arms doing this, right? Trying to walk with one leg going to the side and one leg going forward. They wouldn't go anywhere. You'd be like, hey, dude, we need to get you to a physical therapist. We gotta do some work here. Fix whatever's going wrong with your body. And in fact, if you were a doctor, you'd look and you'd say, well, that person doesn't have an arm injury or a leg injury. You'd say that person has a neurological problem. Their body itself, the core, the brain, the systems that send signals from the brain to the limbs is broken. And that is sort of the fear when you try to come into a role that is compromise and team building based, and instead you treat it like it should be again, like a real estate investment operation or like a hedge fund where there's like one guy who's got to make all the decisions, who's going to like Michael Burry it on his whiteboard. And that's what happens when you bring in hedge fund guys and real estate guys to run a country, right? And this is me throwing shade because again, these guys are fucking Ukraine. And they're not just fucking Ukraine, right? They're also screwing the United States. They're empowering dictators around the world. They're telling Xi Jinping, right? The Ayatollah of Iran, they're telling, the North Koreans that when push comes to shove, dude, the U.S. defense establishment that usually is rock solid, always on point, always prepared, stands toe to toe with their allies. You're saying to everybody there, yo, we're really sick. We are really sick. And if you need us to go bat for you, again, left hand, right hand, left foot, right foot. Is this entity that behaves that way, is that going to defend you from anything? If you're South Korea, do you really think that is your ally? Do you think these guys are going to stand toe to toe, fight the North Koreans, blow for blow, as long as it takes, no daylight, friends side by side? Nah, dude. Nah. You go, this dude's a clueless goober. These people have no idea what they're doing. And, the problem is that eventually what always happens, what happened to Trump in the first administration, what's going to happen this time if we're lucky, is that the people with a brain are going to sit there and go, I can't fucking listen to this guy. I think we should just let him drive around in his armored car, drive around the NASCAR track. We should let him fly around in Air Force One. We should let him go to public meetings because people love him. But we, the adults, should sit there and we got to get together and we got to be like, yo, we got to get on our same sheet of music for this. And basically, we just have to ignore him when he tells us things because they don't make any fucking sense. That's where I think we're going with this. Speaking of things that don't make sense, but we're going to talk about the defense budget cuts. Surprise! Are they even really cuts? And is this really the best way to reduce our defense budget? But before we talk about that, I want to mention two things. The first, three, hit the subscribe button. That helps. Two, you guys might remember from my trip in Ukraine, I met the ATE team. This is some of the elite reconnaissance units, the Ukrainian equivalent of maybe like a Vietnam-era LRP unit. These guys are the best of the best, but to be the best of the best, you got to have some better stuff. That's why Help 99, right, is partnering with the team to raise them some stuff, particularly I guess they call it a drone bus. It's a behind the lines logistics vehicle to help them operate their drones and provide logistics support, right? And we're looking for a bunch of other stuff. So for the Rubiza Brigade, the larger brigade that works with them. And so if you're interested, right, the link is in the description. Plus you can score a sweet patch. I'm going to be honest, I made an extra donation because my neighbor saw my ATE team patch and was like, dude, that is one of the most badass patches I've ever seen. Where can I get one? And I was like, well, I got bad news for you. You got to go sign up and fight for the Ukrainians. Or could donate and get the NAFO patch. So literally, I did an extra donation just for him. Also, of course, if you want to support me and get access to uncensored combat videos, that is on combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon. The reason I can speak truth to power for at least as long as it's still legal, I guess. Who knows, right? We're not Russia yet. Is because I have you guys. You guys have my back, right? I don't have corporate sponsors telling me what to do. I rarely have any sponsors at all. And of course, I don't work for a major media outlet. I don't work for a government. I've never taken money from them. And I can do that because you guys have my back. So, right, sign up, get the membership, plus uncensored combat videos and Q&As for Lieutenant Tier and above. Those are all dropping today because it's Thursday. Okay, let's talk about the Pentagon cuts. All right. Now, I actually don't oppose cuts to the U.S. defense budget, right? I think we overspend on pointless programs. I think we need to focus on the wars of the future. And I think forcing the Pentagon to fight a lean fight is actually good for it. I think it's when you can get every single thing you want all of the time, you don't have to evolve, right? Like we're still basically making acquisitions as though we are going to fight and win the Second World War, right? We had aircraft carriers in the Second World War. Now we have bigger, more powerful aircraft carriers that stretch longer, right? We had tanks in the Second World War. Now we have bigger, better tanks. But it's not clear that the war of the future, remember, if you asked, do you need an aircraft carrier in World War I? If you asked a World War I general, they would say aircraft carriers. You mean aircraft, those things we use for reconnaissance, right? They would say tanks. Why, those are like a car with steel plates on it. That's never going to work, right? And so technology drives the changes to the military. And when you have infinite money, you just keep getting better versions of the same thing. You never are forced to evolve, right? To make question tactical assumptions. So I actually think a little bit of a budget cut is good. And Hegseth is proposing the Pentagon. This has been not accurately reported, and I don't like it. Hegseth is saying that the Pentagon should be prepared to make budget cuts, right? Because remember, the Pentagon cannot cut their own budget. Congress assigns the Pentagon a budget. In fact, they don't even assign them a budget. The Pentagon oftentimes, line by line, says these are the things the budget will be spent on. These are the things we are funding. Boop, 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 boop. Right? So I'll say, this is your money for nuclear submarines. This is your money for modernization. And so the Pentagon, trying to proactively make some of these cuts or propose these cuts, right? It says 8% of the defense budget each year for the next 5 years. That's going to be around, I think, 30-ish%, right? Because every year it'll get a little smaller, right? At least it's graduated. I think that's good. Again, 8% is a big cut. 5 years, 8% a year for 5 years is deep cuts. Because I think, again, that'll be like a third of the defense budget in 5 years. That's a pretty big deduction. But it's not necessarily actually even cuts, right? Because instead of simply cutting it to help even out the U.S. budget, which I think is really important to do, some of those cuts, the rumor is, according to acting Deputy Defense Secretary Robert Salesses, said that it was actually about offsets. It's about freeing up spending to focus on other things, like the Iron Dome for America, because obviously America has a huge problem with homemade rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip, right? That's pretty dumb thus far. Again, and also of unclear treaty value. It's possible we could evolve a domestic ballistic missile shield that is reliable. But it's, again, not clear that aligns with the other thing Trump said, which is discussing an arms control agreement, a denuclearization. You can't both build an Iron Dome that, let's say, it shoots down 50% of all warheads, and also ask for denuclearization because, well, if your enemy, let's say you're Russia, and America says, we did it. We built the Iron Dome. Let's say it's super effective. It's 80% of all incoming warheads get shot down. What does that mean? That means that if you want to hit all of those critical targets in the United States and you're Russia and you want to ensure that you have your mutually assured destruction, you need to, 4x your arsenal, right? Think about it. If you need to hit 100 targets, instead of having 100 warheads because 0 will get stopped, instead, you want to hit those 100 targets and 80% are going to get shot down. No, you need to 5x. You need to 5x your warhead arsenal. So it's not really great in game theory. It's not clear that it's even possible to build a ballistic missile shield. I assume that's what he's talking about, right? And not talking about an absolutely preposterously wasteful and stupid, like conventional missile defense system, which is what like the Israeli Iron Dome is. It's meant to, the Israeli Iron Dome is meant to shoot down primarily homemade rockets and occasionally ballistic missiles. Now, again, the department's going to develop a list of potential offsets that could be used to fund those priorities and refocus the department on its core mission of deterring enemies and winning wars. I think that's, I mean, who doesn't want to deter our enemies and win our wars? It's good that they can at least acknowledge that that's the number one priority, right? But what are Trump's other priorities, right? The Iron Dome for America, and right, he's also said, do not touch nuclear weapon modernization, military operations at the southern border, and one-way attack drones. I think those are good priorities to have. And a lot of people say there is plenty of opportunity, a desperate need for deep cuts in the Pentagon spending, right? The question is, again, is there going to be an actual top-line reduction, or is it going to be just more Doge style, cut everything and find out what was important only after you've broken it? Now, I want to make one other point. Is a lot of times we talk a lot of shit on Congress, and boy, do they deserve it, and excess Pentagon spending, and because boy, do they deserve it. But I want to point out one important thing. The U.S. is actually trying pretty hard to reduce its spending. Here, you can see during the Vietnam War, 1967, the U.S. spent 9.5% of its entire GDP. That's every good and service produced in the United States. We spent 9 cents of every dollar made here, produced in the United States, on the Vietnam War, right? And the Cold War, right? And then you see what happened. After Vietnam ended, we dropped. 1979, we were spending just 4.9% of our GDP on defense. Wow, what a drop. And then, of course, we had the Reagan era ramp up, trying to outspend the Soviet Union. We spent a blistering 6.6%. And then once the Soviet Union fell, we said, great, Clinton era peace dividend, 3.1% of all our goods and services. That means for every dollar produced in the United States, we spent just 3 cents defending ourselves. Right? There was a little bit of a ramp up during the global war on terror, up to, again, 4.9%, for those of you keeping track at home. That's the exact same amount we spent at the bottom of the Vietnam War, the post-Vietnam era. And now that the global war on terror is over, look at what little we're spending. We have not spent this little on defense, in fact, since 2000. So again, when someone tells you we've spent too much money on Ukraine, I want to, here you go. 2022, 3.3%. And then training all those Ukrainian brigades, right? The counteroffensive, equipping Ukraine to fight the Russians, total support. We spent 0.1%. That's the equivalent. If every dollar produced in the United States, we gave 3 cents, 3.5 cents to defending ourselves. And according to this little delta, of that 3.5 cents, we took one of the pennies and we cut out like a third of that penny. And that is what we spent arming Ukraine in 2023. So again, this isn't to say the Pentagon shouldn't get cut. I think it should. I think you should be careful. But we should also acknowledge that the U.S. economy has gone through the roof, supercharged, grown a ton. Defense spending has actually not increased that much. And that's true of all federal spending. In fact, unfortunately, the primary problem that the U.S. has is not that we have a huge growing economy. It's that we don't actually get enough in taxes to offset it. And the number 1 and 2 problems that cause the tremendous growth in federal spending is actually not discretionary spending. It's Social Security and it's Medicare, Medicaid, right? Because people are old, people are sick, and people are old and sick. And so ultimately, until you solve that problem, those three big spending categories, plus to a lesser extent, we spend 6 cents of our federal budget of every dollar of tax collected on the VA. So but the VA, this is just an aside, but the VA is going to fix itself in terms of federal spending. Why? Because let's take a look. Veteran population by age, USA, right? So US population of veterans by gender, as you can see, a huge portion of men 65 to 74 years. The Vietnam era veterans, guys, these guys are old. They are entering the era where they are going to be the sickest, right? The last 10% of your life is where you're going to incur something like 95% of all health-related expenses. And so literally the way to solve the VA funding crisis is wait. Because in 10 years, this whole category of, remember, 75-year men, 75 and older, they are statistically unlikely to live. 50% of them will die within the next year. 50% of the remaining will die after that. It's a very, very diminishing population set. So that's it. You just got to wait. And here's another, again, 21% of the population, of the male population is a veteran in 65 to 74. So literally once these two go, the VA is it's not going to have to provide care. It's going to have to provide care for statistically, what's this, a tenth of the people, maybe, young GWAT vets. So when people are like, oh, you got to cut the fucking VA. Dude, the VA is already cutting itself. Don't you worry. And to an extent, unfortunately, that's probably you can't say the same thing with programs like Medicare and Social Security, right? There's going to be an even bigger wave of aging people that are not offset by young people. That's its own problem. So anyway, again, I'm not like the federal government spends its money great, okay? It doesn't. I'm not stupid, right? But you've got to make sure that if you're going to start making cuts, you got to make it where it's going to count, where it's going to mean something. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. I'll see you guys over on combatvetnews.com. Thank you to our Colonel tier members like James Gerling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Himmeling, Brian Kelly, Del McCombs, Jay Zalwa, Henry Roos here. All of our Lieutenant tier members could not do it without you guys, and I will see you guys over there on Combat Vet News. Cheers.